Imagine this. You are sitting in a boardroom, suits around the table, lawyers, accountants, shareholders, everyone looking at you. You are the CEO, and you are about to make the most controversial decision in the history of your company. You are going to take $500 million, your company's entire cash reserve, and you are going to put it into something that most of the world still calls a scam. People will laugh at you, experts will warn against you, the media will mock you, your own shareholders will question your sanity. But you have done your homework, hundreds of hours of research, and you are absolutely certain. So you look around the room, take a deep breath, and you say the words that will change financial history forever. We are buying Bitcoin. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This is the true story of Michael Saylor, the man who bet his entire company on Bitcoin and changed the world of finance forever. Welcome to Michael Saylor Teaching. I am your host, and today we are going deep, very deep, into the life, the losses, the lessons, and the legendary decisions of the most interesting man in modern finance. Stay with me until the end, because the last part of this story will completely change how you think about money. To understand Michael Saylor today, you have to go back to the beginning. February 4th, 1965, Nebraska, United States of America. A boy is born into a military family. His father is a chief master sergeant in the United States Air Force. Now, growing up in a military family is not easy. You move constantly. New city, new school, new friends, then move again. Most kids would struggle with this, but young Michael Saylor thrived. He learned something that most people never learn: how to adapt quickly, how to stay disciplined no matter the environment, how to focus on what matters and ignore the noise. These lessons would serve him for the rest of his life. In school, Michael was exceptional. Not just smart, exceptionally smart, the kind of student that teachers remember for decades. His academic brilliance earned him something remarkable: a full Air Force ROTC scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, the most prestigious technical university on the planet, where the world's greatest engineers and scientists are trained. And Michael Saylor walked in at 18 years old with nothing but raw intelligence and military discipline. At MIT, he studied two subjects simultaneously: aerospace engineering and science, technology, and society. This combination was unusual but telling. He was not just interested in how things work, he was interested in why things matter to civilization. He graduated in 1987, 2 degrees, top of his class. The world was waiting for him. He spent a brief time doing consulting work, but Michael Saylor was not built to work for someone else. He was built to build something. And in 1989, at just 24 years old, he co-founded a company with a friend. The company was called MicroStrategy, and this small startup would eventually become the center of the most audacious financial bet in corporate history. MicroStrategy started in a small office with a simple idea: businesses collect enormous amounts of data, but most of them have no idea how to use it. Saylor's company would build software to help businesses make sense of their data, to find patterns, make decisions, grow faster. This was called business intelligence software, and in the early 1990s, it was revolutionary. Saylor worked obsessively. 18-hour days were normal for him. He believed deeply in the mission. He recruited brilliant people. He pushed everyone hard, including himself. Slowly, MicroStrategy grew. Then came the internet boom of the late 1990s. The entire technology sector exploded. Companies with no profits were worth billions. Investors were throwing money at anything with a .com in the name, and MicroStrategy, with real technology and real revenue, became a Wall Street darling. By the year 2000, MicroStrategy's stock had risen to $333 per share. The company was worth over $14 billion, and Michael Saylor personally was worth over $7 billion. He was 34 years old and one of the richest people on the planet. He was on magazine covers. He was invited to speak at the most prestigious conferences. He was living in a penthouse in Washington, D.C., throwing lavish parties attended by politicians and celebrities. Life was extraordinary, and then in a single moment, it all fell apart. March 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. Almost overnight, technology stocks began crashing. Companies worth billions became worthless in days. But MicroStrategy's collapse was different. It was not just the market. It was something far more painful. The Securities and Exchange Commission, America's financial regulator, began investigating MicroStrategy for accounting irregularities. The company had been reporting revenues incorrectly. Numbers had been inflated. When the restatement was announced, MicroStrategy's stock crashed from $333 per share to under $10 per share in a single day. Michael Saylor lost $6 billion of personal net worth in 24 hours. This is still one of the largest single-day personal wealth destructions in the history of American finance. Saylor himself had to pay a personal fine of $350,000 to settle with the SEC. The company nearly collapsed entirely. The media was brutal. Former admirers became critics overnight. Shareholders were furious. Employees were scared. And Michael Saylor sat in the ruins of everything he had built and faced a choice that defines a person's character forever: quit or rebuild. Most people in his position would have walked away, taken whatever money remained, moved on quietly. But Saylor was not most people. He stayed. He restructured the company, cut costs brutally, refocused the business, worked to rebuild trust with shareholders and customers. For the next 20 years, Michael Saylor quietly rebuilt MicroStrategy. It was not glamorous. It was not on magazine covers. It was just hard, disciplined, daily work. And during those 20 years, Saylor was thinking deeply about one question that would eventually change everything. That question was simple: where should a company store its wealth? He did not know the answer yet, but he was searching. And in 2020, he found it. March 2020, the world shuts down. COVID-19 spreads across every country. Governments panic, economies freeze, and central banks around the world do something extraordinary. They start printing money, trillions of dollars, trillions of euros, trillions of every currency. The United States alone printed more money in 2020 than in its entire previous history combined. And Michael Saylor, sitting in his office, looked at MicroStrategy's balance sheet. The company had approximately $500 million in cash, sitting in bank accounts, earning almost nothing. And Saylor realized something that terrified him: that cash was melting, not literally, but financially. Inflation was going to eat it alive. If the government prints trillions of new dollars, each existing dollar becomes worth less. The purchasing power of cash decays. Saylor later described this moment by saying that holding cash felt like sitting on a melting ice cube. He needed to find somewhere better to store the company's wealth. So he began the most intense research period of his life. He looked at gold, the traditional store of value, but gold was slow, heavy, hard to move, easy to confiscate, and it had no yield in the digital economy. He looked at real estate, but real estate was illiquid, location-dependent, and complicated. He looked at other stocks and assets, but everything had counterparty risk. Everything depended on someone else's decisions. And then someone mentioned Bitcoin. Now, here is the part that surprises most people. In 2013, Michael Saylor had publicly called Bitcoin a gambling instrument. He had said on Twitter that Bitcoin's days were numbered. He was skeptical, even dismissive. But in 2020, facing a genuine financial crisis, he decided to approach Bitcoin with an open mind. He started reading the original Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, every technical document he could find, every economic argument for and against. He spent weeks doing nothing but studying Bitcoin. And slowly, something shifted in his thinking. He began to see Bitcoin not as a currency, not as a speculative asset, but as something far more profound. He saw it as the first truly scarce digital asset in human history. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. No government can print more. No company can dilute it. No politician can confiscate it easily. Saylor later said that Bitcoin is not just money. Bitcoin is energy transformed into incorruptible, immortal, mathematically perfect capital. For a man who had watched his wealth evaporate because of accounting errors and human decisions, the idea of a monetary system based on pure mathematics and code was revolutionary. He was convinced. Now the question was, how much should he buy? August 2020, Michael Saylor calls an emergency board meeting. He presents his research to the board of MicroStrategy, hundreds of slides, every objection addressed, every risk analyzed. He makes his case. Bitcoin is the best treasury reserve asset available, better than cash, better than gold, better than bonds. The board is nervous. This is unprecedented. No publicly traded company has ever done this before. But Saylor is compelling. His logic is airtight. His conviction is total. The board approves. On August 11, 2020, MicroStrategy announces to the world that it has purchased 21,454 Bitcoin for approximately $250 million at a price of around $11,663 per Bitcoin. The reaction is immediate and fierce. CNBC anchors shake their heads. Financial analysts issue warning notes. Shareholders threaten to sell. Short sellers begin betting against the stock. The headlines are brutal. MicroStrategy CEO goes mad. Corporate suicide mission. Saylor gambling with shareholder money. But Saylor does not waver. In fact, he doubles down. Within weeks, MicroStrategy announces it is buying more Bitcoin, then more again. And then Saylor does something no one expected. He starts publicly teaching other CEOs how to do the same thing. He creates a free educational program called Bitcoin for Corporations. He invites executives from around the world to attend. He shares every detail of MicroStrategy's strategy. He is not just buying Bitcoin for his company. He is trying to start a movement. And it works. Within months, other companies begin following. Tesla announces a Bitcoin purchase. Square adds Bitcoin to its balance sheet. Dozens of smaller companies follow. Michael Saylor had started a revolution, and it was only just beginning. Let me give you some numbers because they are truly staggering. When Saylor made his first Bitcoin purchase in August 2020, MicroStrategy bought 21,454 Bitcoin for $250 million. That was just the beginning. Over the next 4 years, Saylor kept buying and buying and buying. Every time Bitcoin dipped, he bought more. Every time Wall Street warned him to stop, he bought more. Every time the media called him crazy, he bought more. By early 2025, MicroStrategy, now renamed simply Strategy, had accumulated over 500,000 Bitcoin. 500,000 Bitcoin at an average purchase price of around $66,000 per coin. Total investment over $33 billion. Let that sink in for a moment. One company, one man's conviction. $33 billion invested in a single asset that most of the world still did not fully understand. And when Bitcoin's price rose, the gains were extraordinary. At Bitcoin's peak prices, Strategy's Bitcoin holdings were worth over $47 billion, a profit of over $14 billion on paper. Michael Saylor had transformed a struggling software company into one of the largest Bitcoin holders on the planet, larger than most governments, larger than most sovereign wealth funds. The man who had lost $6 billion in a single day in 2000 had rebuilt himself into something far greater through the power of conviction and patience. But here is where the story gets truly remarkable, because it was not all gains and glory. In 2022, Bitcoin crashed hard. From a peak of nearly $69,000 in November 2021, Bitcoin fell all the way to around $16,000 by late 2022, a drop of over 75%. Strategy's Bitcoin holdings lost billions in value. The unrealized losses were staggering. The media went into a frenzy. Saylor is finished. MicroStrategy will go bankrupt. Bitcoin has destroyed the company. Short sellers piled in. The stock collapsed. And then in February 2026, even after Bitcoin had partially recovered, Strategy reported an unrealized loss of $6.5 billion in a single quarter. $6.5 billion. The largest quarterly unrealized loss in the company's history. Everyone waited to see how Saylor would respond. Would he panic? Would he sell? Would he finally admit he was wrong? He went on CNBC, calm, composed, smiling, and he said 4 words that stunned the financial world. We don't sell, ever. He explained his thinking clearly. He said, if you truly believe Bitcoin is the apex asset of civilization, then every price dip is not a loss. It is an opportunity. He said volatility is not the enemy of wealth. Volatility is the price you pay for extraordinary returns. He said the only way to lose in Bitcoin is to sell at the bottom. And then he announced that Strategy would be buying even more Bitcoin. The room was speechless. This was not recklessness. This was not stubbornness. This was the most disciplined, long-term thinking that the financial world had ever witnessed from a corporate CEO. Michael Saylor was not gambling. He was playing an entirely different game than everyone else in the room. To truly understand Michael Saylor, you need to understand his philosophy, because he is not just a Bitcoin investor, he is a Bitcoin philosopher. His core belief is this: for thousands of years, human beings have tried to store value. We used gold, we used land, we used currency. but every single store of value in history has eventually been corrupted, inflated, or confiscated. Gold can be seized by governments. Land can be taxed to nothing. Currency can be printed into worthlessness. Bitcoin, Saylor believes, is the first truly perfect store of value in human history. It cannot be printed. There will only ever be 21 million. It cannot be seized easily. It exists only in mathematics. It cannot be corrupted. The code is open and immutable. He calls it perfected capital, incorruptible capital, programmable capital. He also has a fascinating view on volatility. Most investors fear price swings. Saylor celebrates them. He says volatility is vitality. A volatile asset is a living asset. It is finding its true price in real time. The assets with no volatility, government bonds, savings accounts, those are the truly dangerous ones because they decay silently. Their purchasing power disappears slowly, and by the time you notice, it is too late. Bitcoin's volatility, in Saylor's view, is the cost of admission to the greatest wealth-building opportunity in human history. And his famous philosophy on selling, he says, do not trade your Bitcoin. Feed the flame. Do not dance with it. Every time you sell, you pay taxes. Every time you sell, you take on timing risk. Every time you sell, you might miss the next explosion upward. Just buy, hold, and wait. This is a philosophy of extreme patience and extreme conviction. And so far, for Michael Saylor, it has worked better than almost any investment strategy in the history of finance. So what is the lesson of Michael Saylor's story? It is not go buy Bitcoin right now. The lesson is much deeper than that. Lesson 1. Conviction built on deep research is more powerful than consensus built on shallow thinking. Saylor did not buy Bitcoin because everyone else was doing it. He bought it because he spent hundreds of hours studying it and reached his own conclusion. Lesson 2. Your greatest setback can become your greatest setup. Saylor lost $6 billion in one day in the year 2000. That humiliation and pain forced him to think differently about money. And that different thinking eventually made him one of the most influential financial figures of his generation. Lesson 3. Patience is the rarest and most valuable asset in investing. While the entire world panicked and sold during crashes, Saylor sat quietly and bought more. And history so far has rewarded that patience enormously. Lesson 4. The most important financial decision is not what to buy, it is what not to sell. And lesson 5, the people who change the world are always called crazy first. Michael Saylor was called crazy in 2020, he was called reckless in 2021, he was called finished in 2022. Today, he sits at the head of one of the most fascinating companies in financial history. Whether you agree with his Bitcoin thesis or not, one thing is absolutely undeniable. Michael Saylor is a man of extraordinary conviction, extraordinary patience, and extraordinary courage. And there is something deeply inspiring about that, regardless of what you think about Bitcoin. That is the story of the man who bet his company on Bitcoin and refused to look back. I hope you found this valuable today. If you did, please subscribe to Michael Saylor Teaching. We cover the ideas, strategies, and philosophy of one of the most interesting minds in modern finance every single week. I will see you in the next video.